Hello and welcome to my blog. My name's Steve Edney. I'm the head gardener here at the Secret Gardens of Sandwich at the Salutation, and it's June. June, of course, is a month of the year when we see the longest day of the year arrive, and it heralds in then the beginning of the end almost. But many gardens, of course, are at their best during midsummer and late in the summer. The Salutation, we try very hard to avoid the June gap that many gardeners know and many fear. Of course, we use a lot of annuals to try and combat that June gap. We have a huge spring display of bulbs primarily and early flowering herbaceous. So the nice thing about June for us, even if there isn't masses of flower going on, there is so much promise of plants building all around us, particularly annuals. Here in the vegetable garden we have a magnificent calendula neon which is flowering at the moment. It's not just a beautiful plant but also a companion plant because it attracts in hoverflies and lacewings and the ladybird larvae that of course will be our beneficial predators in our fight against the pests and diseases in the vegetable garden. Of course it's an abundant time as well. June sees many crops starting to reach the point where we can harvest them or take bits from them, whether it be leafy salads or whether it be onions that we may be lifting and harvesting. Even some more unusuals like things like nasturtiums, you know, we pick the leaves and the flowers. So people think they're in the vegetable garden just for their beautiful colours, but actually they have an ulterior motive as well. Some things, of course, in the vegetable garden are also fodder, if you like. They're there to be eaten by things, caterpillars, for instance, so that we're not continually fighting them off of our brassicas. Our cabbages, our two biggest threats to our cabbages tend to be pigeons, which land in the trees in the evenings all around us and then spot our cabbages and swoop in and have their way and peck them to death. And the other one, of course, is caterpillars. That's a real problem for us. But June is a fantastic month. If you can't have a nice garden in June, then you either haven't been trying at all or you need to give up gardening, I think. Almost any fair weather fool can have a good garden in June is what I tend to say when I talk to lots of people. But the annuals which are building now, the herbaceous framework which is flowering and building for the autumn as well, it's all set in place now. Late May and right through June we do a planting of about 8,000 annual plants. So that's everything from dahlias and cannas right through to some more of the exotic annuals and unusual annuals like Amelia centrifolia with its very relaxed habit and lovely bright red flowers. Things that perhaps you wouldn't see very often like Panicum frosted explosion. It's an introduction from North America. Very good for flower arrangers. So we have it here in the vegetable garden and it gets planted in amongst things like our asparagus, so that while the asparagus is finished cropping ages ago and it's got that lovely soft frothy foliage, well, so can the panicum. It can link in very nicely with it. There's no reason why you can't have a beautiful vegetable garden as well as a productive one. Of course, first and foremost we try to make sure that we produce as much of the seasonal salad and vegetable for the tea rooms, for the family. And of course we're sowing in succession. That's the key, so that at least every 2 weeks there is something else being sown so that there is a continuation of crops for harvest right through the late summer and right through the winter even. Roses, of course, it is June and they feature enormously in the garden. Now we don't have dedicated rose gardens here, we don't have beds of roses. I don't like that. To be honest, I just feel that it breeds a vicious cycle of diseases and often pests that really do cause so much trouble to roses. We don't do any spraying of any kind in the garden. We don't use fungicides, we don't use insecticides, we don't use herbicides. So the roses that are in the garden have to be capable of holding their own against the mildews and the black spots and all the leaf eaters and all that sort of stuff, like every other plant, of course. So instead of planting them in big beds, because of course they'd flower and they look beautiful, but then they'd be over quite quickly. We are only a 3.5 acre garden. Every area of the garden has to be a succession of colour because it has to work exceptionally hard. Otherwise, you'd have whole areas of the garden which would look fantastic for a few weeks of the year, and then you'd be waiting for it to build, or you'd be watching it decay. And so that's not how I like to garden. We like to see as much colour coming on in succession as we can. So our roses are integrated into all of our beds, right across the garden. Some are in the woodland garden, like Kifskate, Rambling Rector and Seagull. There are some climbers and ramblers and scramblers that like to work their way through trees and shrubs and over arbours and arches that are there. Right through to the obelisks, through the centre of the garden. We've got Rhapsody in Blue, which is quite a new introduction, and then we've got old-fashioned ones as well, right through the garden. We do try to make sure that the roses that are in the garden are actually older varieties that would have been available to Gertrude Jekyll at the turn of the century, or certainly available to the garden team at the turn of the century. So pre-1912 varieties figure quite highly on our list when we are ever looking to introduce a rose. That's not to say exclusively we have old varieties, because like I said before about Rhapsody in Blue, if we're particularly taken by a certain rose, then we just have to have it. If we think it's going to work and fit into a colour scheme or a succession of a planting plan, then we absolutely will use it.